on Facebook, and we'll record. Again, Joyce, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're
Thank you.
recovering well. Again, for those who joined late, Joyce is not on an angle because she's sick. She's not in some interesting protocol of, experimental treatment.
Joyce, I don't think it's your Zoom settings. It has to be your camera settings somehow.
Yeah, I know.
On the Mac.
I don't know what I did.
No, it's on your computer. It's your camera settings.
Yeah,
Mark, go over there and fix it.
I fixed her phone last week. I'm gonna have to do her computer now. No, honestly,
good job.
Mike, I know, Mike, I would, and that's not an issue. The only thing is, I looked at system preferences for the computer. I don't see on system preferences for.
No, you got to actually go into the camera settings.
The who?
I'm not a Mac person, so I don't know. But I like on my PC. There's camera settings.
I know. So we have system preferences. I don't want to take time away from this, but I will tell you that there's a system preferences thing. I don't know what you call it, menu choice, and it gives you the ability to work on your displays, your settings, your desktop, those kind of things, printers. The problem is I don't see where you mess or you keyboard. I just don't see sound. I don't see where the screen is though. That's the only thing.
I could be upside down. At least I'm on my side.
We'll work on it. We'll work on it another. I will figure it. I mean, I will look at it if I have to. I will
All
go
right.
over there and do it. Otherwise, I'll.
Well, I know I could figure it out.
You could, but anyways, let's get on it. I will make it. I actually am curious. I like to know these things so that in case it happens somewhere else, I can help out. All right. So I definitely am not a computer specialist, but I don't want to be at the mercy of people who, I could figure out the answer much easier. I'm definitely not a handy person, but I don't want to be completely an idiot. So, anyway,
Let me be the idiot.
That being said, there is this stuff I do know. Anyways, but I always learn something new, and that is Genesis chapter 20, which again, for those that were not here last week, I think almost everybody was. We finished off the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which with the wonderful birth narrative and the fact that Lot ended up impregnating his two daughters. They both had a son with their dad, which made him both their father and grandfather. I know there's a song about that, but anyways, this is a not a good thing.
No.
This was not held as an example of righteous behavior, moral behavior. It's not the way things are supposed to be. You can make the argument that the daughters of Lot thought that it was the end of their line, and that there wouldn't be anybody to keep their family's legacy alive. It also seems like he had older daughters that already were married and were left behind in Sodom and Gomorrah. So the feeling of post-traumatic stress and worrying about this is maybe a little bit more acceptable, though it's very creepy, and it also is disturbing. Gets to the issue of alcohol and sex, which we saw in the story of Noah, alluded to here. It's very clear that the alcohol leads to sexual immorality in this case, which again was actually women taking advantage of a man, not the other way around. Actually, in both cases, both Noah and Lot, it is the man who is taken advantage of in an intoxicated state. So it's very troubling. It's upsetting. And more importantly, more than anything else, it's supposed to be making fun of the Moabites and the Ammonites of today. Okay, so the implication here is that Moabites and Ammonites are the descendants of an incestuous relationship. Okay, we don't know the Moabite and Ammonite version of this story. It might be that That is not their version, that, that this was the Jewish version of the story, the Israelite version. They didn't have this version, but we do know that they're both on the other side of the Jordan River. We don't really know what they felt about themselves. We don't know whether the Moabites and Ammonites felt that they were more connected than they were to Israel or to the Edomites, for example. We don't know whether they had that kind of kinship feeling. Maybe they did. These two kingdoms nearby each other. We only learn about them from our Bible. We really don't know much about them other than that. We have some archaeological evidence, not a whole lot. Don't know a lot about their relationship with each other. We do know that the Israelites at times fought with both of them. Sometimes they were vassal states of Israel during King David and Solomon's time. We controlled those areas. They were tributaries of the kingdom. So, but they're, again, sometimes independent, and sometimes they're a problem to us. But at the end of the day, they are the product of an incestuous relationship. Before we start laughing at this weird incestuous relationship, let's take a look at chapter 20, and then you can tell me whether there might be another issue here, which is a story back to Abraham and Sarah. And chapter 20 picks up, it says, Abraham journeyed from there to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. Now, we just had this little story from chapter 19 of Sodom and Gomorrah. But before that, if you recall, Abraham is in a tent by Alon Mamre, this area that he lives in sometimes, that he camps out sometimes. And that's where he is after his circumcision. He's been told that he's going to have a baby this time next year. Baby will be named Isaac. He's actually, we know that this baby's going to come about because God, and it seems like angels with God tell him and Sarah. And then we have we switch over to Sodom and Gomorrah, and now we come back to Abraham. And it says that he settled in Kadesh and Sur, in this area between Kadesh and Sur. Sure. And this is an area in the desert, in the Negev region, which is the southern part of Israel. And it's part of his area that's been promised to him and his descendants, but he doesn't take control over it. It's just him and his family and his entourage. And really his family is, at this point, Ishmael and Hagar and the male and female slaves that he has with Sarah. And here it says that while he's sojourning, while he's living temporarily or pasturing or nomading, or again, the idea is he's dwelling there in a place called Gerar, Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. So King Avimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. But God came to Avimelech in a dream by night and said to him, you are to die because of the woman that you've taken, for she is a married woman. Now, this is a condensed version of story that we have between Sarah and Pharaoh and Abraham back in chapter 15, right? So we've seen this story before. This is another version of it. I will say this. I will say that when we read about this story back in chapter 12, it says a little bit more detail that Abraham says to Sarah when they're in Egypt, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you, tell them that you're my sister, because if you say you're my wife, they'll kill me. And it says the Pharaoh is told about her beauty, has her brought, and she's taken to the palace. And then the Pharaoh gets hit by mighty plagues, and then Pharaoh finds out that the plagues are there because Sarai was Avram's wife. So the question here is, here it just jumps from Avram said of his wife, she is my sister, so King Avimelech had her brought to him. And then it says God came to Avimelech. So it's like a lot of stuff gets cut off, is not here. That's in the earlier story. So I don't know. Well, okay, so let's say this. Let's say this. There are those who say both of these stories are kind of mythological. They're not exactly necessarily based on exactly what may have happened, but teach us a lesson. Teach us a lesson about the world that Abraham and Sarah lived in. That being said, there are people who say, naming biblical scholars who say, one version of the story in chapter 12 was written by an author that we sometimes call J, who uses the word Adonai, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, name for God. This story uses the word God, and you see right here, Vayavo Elohim, that it's a different author. So it's a possibility that it's a different author. Let's say that. That's why I said, do I even go there? These are one of those occasions, and I don't do it very often. I definitely don't do it every week, where I'll say that's a possibility. That there were two narratives of this story. The editor brought together both narratives. Okay, so there might be differences in the narratives and there might be some similarities because the intention was to show both stories. That being said, it doesn't matter to some extent because an editor or somebody decided to have both of these stories here. So there's two versions of the same story, maybe, or they both happen, whatever the reason, they're both here. And so we have to make sense of it. We have to kind of like, why do we have two versions of the story, or what do these two versions tell us? Or
and what do we need to learn from this to use now? What do we need to know?
Yeah. And it kind of begs the question, did Abraham learn his lesson the first time from Egypt? Or if we thought he learned his lesson from it, maybe the lesson isn't what we thought. So, because you could say, well, Abraham, like when we say he's learned his lesson, it means he's not going to do it anymore. Well, maybe that's not the lesson that he took away. Maybe he took away from this is like, I don't really have a choice. It ended up working out okay for me because I came away with that with a lot of stuff. The Pharaoh gave me a whole lot of property and, items to take. And so it didn't really work out bad for me. And then it kind of begs the question of what do we take away from this with regards to Abraham's behavior? And I mean, to some extent, Sarah's behavior, though we can say that it's really not up to Sarah. Sarah doesn't really have a choice. This is Abraham doing what he's doing, and he's the one who says she's my sister. Now, that being said, if Abraham is doing this knowingly and kind of, I wouldn't say, well, maybe doesn't take away that this is a bad thing to do. It's partly because the rabbis have said he's not lying when she says she's my sister. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's not clear in the first story, but it is clear in this story. So so even though we didn't get information here in this story yet, in the sense that like it skipped a whole bunch of stuff that we had in the last story, we get information after that we didn't get in the previous story. So maybe you can make the argument we had to have both stories because they kind of together give us a better picture of it. And then of course reinforces the fact that Sarah and Abraham lived in really dangerous times. And so then there's a question, do the patriarchs really lie? Are they really doing something wrong? Or are they kind of, the worst thing they do is omit some of the facts and they're basically have no choice. But let's see what happens. Let's see what happens in this story and come back to that idea. But you can't read this chapter in chapter 20 without thinking about chapter 12. It's impossible not to go back to that. And I did point out last week when we read about Hagar, or the week before, sorry, we read about Hagar, that there is the teaching, and it is possible that Hagar wound up coming into Abraham's house because of that. If Pharaoh gave Abraham slaves, male and female slaves, what if one of those female slaves was Hagar, who we know is an Egyptian? What if she came to Abraham in that exchange? Which then, of course, begs the question, was that fate? Was that something that was a consequence that was not a good consequence that came about because Abraham didn't have enough faith in God to protect him without lying or obfuscating or at least omitting part of the truth? All of those things are possibilities, because if Hagar essentially is now part of the, not the solution, but part of the problem, then she's part of the problem because of what Abraham and Sarai, but really Abraham did. Okay. And I call them Avram and Sarai because technically in chapter 12, they're still Avram and Sarai. But anyways, Abraham and Sarah. So here's what happens. God comes to Avimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are to die because of the woman that you have taken, for she is a married woman." So God, in this case, actually comes to Avimelech, which is not what happens in the Pharaoh story, where it basically just says that Pharaoh, the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai. And then Pharaoh sent for Abraham, "What have you done to me? Why did you not tell me she was his wife?" So somehow Pharaoh deduces in the story that Sarai is really Avram's wife. In this story, God makes it clear to Avimelech. So there are differences, and maybe again, the composite picture that we have kind of makes the whole narrative, both narratives kind of come together. So anyways, God tells him, and Avimelech had not approached her. He said, "O Lord, will you slay people even though innocent? He himself said to me, she's my sister. And she also said, he is my brother. When I did this, my heart was blameless and my hands are clean, were clean." Now, what's so cool about what Avimelech does.
Rabbi, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure, go
If
ahead.
you look at my photo, I'm upside down now.
Yes, you are.
Okay, I can fix you now, Joyce.
What should I do?
Okay, on your bottom, on the bottom, you'll see something that says stop video. Do you see that?
Yes,
Okay, there's a little arrow on the right side. Hit that.
hit that little arrow. I
All
did.
right. Okay, then go to video settings.
Yeah, I go to that. I clicked
Okay, and
on
your
that.
picture comes up. And
Yes.
the corner of your picture
Yeah,
is a little black thing that
Oh, I
has
see
an
it.
arrow around it.
I
Hit
see
says
that
it.
until you're
rotate.
right side up.
no.
No, now you're
No.
upside down.
The top,
One more
it's
time.
the
There
Oh,
you
there
go.
I am.
It's the
Thank
top.
you. And now I can leave it like this. Bless you.
Onward with the class.
Way to go, Mike.
There you go,
Thank
man.
you.
Maybe we should all go upside down.
Now, how do I get rid of this?
Wait, now you gotta fix the rabbi.
There's no fixing the rabbi.
No, that's done. I was just fooling around, but yeah, thanks, Mike. I never knew that. I never saw that. I knew.
I looked it up. I looked it up while during
I
class.
didn't. I
All right,
didn't.
how do I get back? It's now in the middle of the printing.
Oh, I think there's an X you can just hit out of there. Let me just, before you do that, on the right side of that picture, there'll be an X, just X out of that.
Yeah.
I don't see the X.
Right above right to the right of your picture
And up a little.
and up a little.
You see it?
Oh. There's a red thing. I found the red dot.
The red
Yeah,
dot.
that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike. We don't have.
Thank
X's.
you.
We have
Oh
red.
my God.
We have red.
Thank
dots.
you for right siding me. Thank you, Mike.
Hey, that's what I get paid for.
So he makes his big.
Good. You deserve it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So back to Avimelech, who again is the. By the way, his name means my father, the king. It's a title. There is. It seems like it's more of like the word Pharaoh too. By the way, and it's a title, and it says, Avimelech says to. He said to God, "O Lord." By the way, he says, "Lord." will you slay people even though innocent? And what's interesting about this phrase, will you kill the innocent? It sounds a whole lot like what Abraham said last week to God when he said to God, are you going to kill the innocent in Sodom and Gomorrah, even with the guilty? So
Uh-huh.
he uses the same approach to God, which is, God, you're supposed to protect the innocent. And so he's basically saying, I'm innocent. I didn't do anything. You can't destroy me. I didn't do anything. And not only that, again, if I even did something, he's the one who told me. I didn't do anything wrong. Even taking her and bringing her into my midst wasn't wrong. Now, you're going to say, well, that seems to be correct. He doesn't seem to do anything wrong. Now, we don't really know because it says while he was sojourning in Gerar, Avram said to his wife, she is my sister. So Avimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. Now, what's missing there is a whole lot. Like, what would even, like, why would that even happen? I do want to point out that at this point, we already know Sarah's a 90-year-old woman. So again, she must have been strikingly beautiful. I know some 90-year-old women that are that beautiful. I could see that, right, Joyce? And so we know that there are women in their 90s who could be that fetching. But what's so weird is that Avimelech seems to just like have Sarah brought to him. There's not like even an asking. There's not even the word gets back to him like Pharaoh. He just does it. Now, part of what the rabbis interpret here is because that's what he did. And that's the indication that he, even though he's claiming he is an innocent guy, even though he's claiming he didn't do anything wrong, what right does he have just to take a woman anyways?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that's the problem, if you will, that he doesn't even recognize that he doesn't have a right just to take every woman, beautiful woman that comes into his kingdom. That's not what people do. So that's the way the rabbis interpret it. Is that the case? We don't know. It's not there in the Torah. It just literally says that he has her brought. He has the dream. He says to God, you can't do that. And God said to him in his dream, I know that you did this with a blameless heart. So I kept you from sinning against me. That was why I did not let you touch her. So here it's clear that there was no funny business that happened. And he says, God further says to Abimelech, therefore restore the man's wife. Since he is a prophet, he will intercede for you to save your life. If you fail to restore her, know that you shall die, you and all that are yours. And so it's interesting that God kind of threatens Avimelech. And he basically says, that guy can help you. He's a prophet. That's the first time, by the way, we've had anybody be called a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham is a prophet. So he says to him, he'll help you, but you better do the right thing. And if you don't, you're going to die, and everything in your midst will die. All that's yours will die. Early the next morning, Avimelech called his servants and told them all that had happened, and the men were greatly frightened. Then Avimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? What wrong have I done to you? You should bring so great a guilt upon me in my kingdom. You've done to me things that ought not to be done. What then, Abimelech demanded of Abraham, was your purpose in doing this thing? So he says to him flat out, why did you do this to me? And now Abraham is going to tell him. And this is what we don't have in the other story with the Egyptians. Even though we have more information in some ways, we don't have this conversation. I thought, said Abraham, surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. And so here Abraham says right back to the people, I didn't think there was any morality in this place. I thought that this was a place that was devoid of any type of recognition of God and of what people are supposed to do. And so I feared for my life. And then we get this line, which we have not had before. And besides, she is in truth my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother's, and she became my wife. So when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, let this be the kindness that you shall do to me. Whatever place we come to, say there of me, he is my brother. Now,
So he didn't really lie.
so that's one thing that the rabbis say is that, well, the fact is he didn't lie. I mean, it says he didn't lie. Right here, we're told that they're brother and sister, half brother and sister. Now, nowhere in the Bible does it say that. Okay, it didn't say that earlier. As I told you, it says that there's this woman Isca, who some of the rabbis interpret is another name for Sarah, but it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case. And anyways, Isca would not be his sister, it would have been his niece. It was Haran's daughter. Haran had a daughter, two daughters actually, and one of those daughters would have been Isca. Now, is it possible that he calls his niece his daughter? Possible, because it's essentially, there are other places where he'll call Lot my son essentially, and Lot is his nephew. So it's possible that it is his niece and he just calls her his sister, even though it's technically a generation removed. Not illegal according to Jewish law. So if that's the case, then the rabbis can kind of get him off the hook a little bit from true incest, biblical incest, I guess you could say, based on the fact that that's a legal marriage according to Judaism. It would not be legal if they were brother and sister. So then the rabbis have a problem, because either he's lying, there's only two possibilities. He's either lying at this point. Well, I told you the third option is that he's his niece, in which case he's not lying or committing incest. But there's really only other two possibilities then, which is that he's either lying or he's committing incest. Believe it or not, the rabbis are actually more comfortable with him practicing incest than they are that he's lying. And what they say is it's because that was what was done before there was the law, before Abraham. What they basically say is these were the laws from Noah. These were the these were the laws before Abraham. And so he didn't break any law from before Abraham, pre-Abrahamic, pre-God covenant, which again, we don't know for sure that Abraham had the Torah, but the rabbis definitely aren't going to go down that road. They're not going to accept that Abraham didn't live by the covenant. Well, just number one, he's already circumcised himself, so he's already fulfilling some mitzvot. But did he fulfill all the mitzvot, as we talked about last week, when he makes the curds and maybe the yogurt for the angels and then serves the meat? Rabbis don't feel comfortable that he even would have served the milk and meat together in the same meal. So those are kinds of things to think about, that whether the rabbis interpreted or whether not just the rabbis, but whether people felt that Abraham and the pre Mount Sinai were Jews following the laws of the Torah before they had the Torah. Okay, so that's an important idea. Did Abraham observe Shabbat? The rabbis believe to this day, or in Orthodox Judaism, that Abraham observed Shabbat. Flat out. They will not accept that Abraham, once Abraham is told to circumcise himself, all the other commandments essentially are like he's taking on all the commandments. So it's not just the commandment of circumcision, it's all the other commandments. Shabbat, keeping the holidays, all these things are now incumbent on Abraham. So they feel comfortable with that. We teach that. We don't teach. I mean, people, it's been taught by Jewish history over thousands of years of Jewish history that if Abraham didn't follow this law when he married Sarah, it's because he was still following the traditions before he had the law. Once he's circumcised, once he's taken on the covenant, then he will do the right thing. It kind of begs the question, folks, what I'm getting to, when he says, when Abraham says, let this be the kindness that you shall do to me, right? That's a weird phrase. Let this be the kindness that you shall do to me. There seems to be like some unspoken fit. I don't know what you really call it, but it's kind of almost like an agreement between them that they're going to live in this state of their relationship, but this relationship is going to be cemented by this kind of this recognition that sometimes this is what we'll call our relationship, that sometimes we'll essentially tell people that we're brother and sister. Sometimes that will be what we tell people, and sometimes we'll live as husband and wife. It's a weird phrase. Let this be the kindness that you shall do to me. So, because why? I mean, why does she need to do this kindness to him? What is it, to save his life? Is it because is it because like, is that what everybody does? I mean, doesn't seem like that would be the case, but it could be if they were indeed brother and sister. Now it says, what happens? Avimelech took sheep, oxen, male and female slaves, and gave them to Abraham, and he restored his wife Sarah to him. Sounds familiar, right? That's what the Egyptians did too. Same deal. We took your wife from you for a bit. We're going to pay you restitution. So we've heard that. Not just property, but included in that property, I guess you could say, are people, are slaves, male and female slaves. And even more, Avimelech says, here, my land is before you. Settle wherever you please. Hinei artzi lefanecha. Wherever you want, whatever you think is good, that's where you can settle. Now, what's interesting about it is Abraham in the back of his mind says, I don't need you to tell me that, Avimelech. God told me that already. But there is something special about this, which is that now Avimelech essentially has told Abraham, you can settle wherever you want. I'll keep my mouth shut. You can do whatever you want, pick whatever area you want to graze your herds, and you're not going to have a problem with me, right? I'm not going to send out my soldiers to bother you. You can go wherever you want. You don't have to, assumedly, you don't have to consider paying me for it. You don't. It's yours. Go wherever you want.
Rabbi, in verse 14, is it saying that he restored his wife Sarah, meaning that Abimelech had Sarah as his wife, even though there was no
Yeah.
Okay, so he's giving up, quote unquote.
He's giving up his right. So assumedly they had some kind of marriage or some kind of bond, some contract that they signed, and the contract is now null and void. He basically says, I'm giving you back your wife, which again, for a king to do that is a pretty big deal, because it's literally like humbling the king. I will point out again, we have the versions, chapter 12 and chapter 20, not that far apart, as we discussed before. If we're reading this in a normal year, it's one Torah portion away. It's Vayelech, and then, Lech Lecha, and then Vayera. I mean, it's literally bang, bang, back-to-back Torah portions, back-to-back stories. But they're not really, there's stuff that happened in the middle, including the Sodom and Gomorrah story, including the story that we usually just focus on Sodom and Gomorrah, but we forget ends with a story of incest. And now we're basically being told that Abraham and Sarah are brother and sister. And I will tell you something else. We have the story in chapter 12. We have the story in chapter 20. The story says in chapter 13, whatever place we come to, say there of me, he is my brother. Which implies maybe that this didn't happen twice. Does this mean whatever place they came to? I mean, did they always have to do it? Did they do it a couple times and we just know the couple times? Or did they do it dozens of times? And these are the only 2 times we actually heard the story because they teaches us a lesson, or these are famous people that it happened with, or, I mean, this seems to imply that this author or this version or whatever, that we know it happened at least once. Maybe it happened more than once. He doesn't say, oh, this happened back in Egypt, which again, if they're 2 different authors, that author's not going to say. I don't know what to tell you. You know, some people have taken this to mean that this author had the other author's story in front of him or knew the other author's story, and this was their play off of that story. But I don't know. I don't know that that's the case. I mean, I guess it's more likely that story, the J story, existed before this one, but I'm not sure about that. But it's not over. So he gives him everything, you know, to settle. You can settle anywhere you want. And to Sarah, he said, I herewith give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will serve as a vindication before all who are with you, and you are cleared before everyone. That's a lot of money. As we talked about yesterday, 1,000 pieces of silver is a lot of money. It's like 100 years worth of salary, if you will. It's a lot of money. It's way more than a bride price. It's like 1,000 bride prices.
So maybe he didn't feel strong enough until this time to be able to protect his wife or Sarah. You know, now he's got all this money and he's got sheep and he'd be able to have more people and maybe more. You know, and he's not liable to get robbed as easily.
Yeah.
When he set out in the beginning, it was just him and Sarah. I don't know how much. I mean, I just get this feeling that there wasn't a lot of them.
Yes, that's a possibility. Yeah, that's a possibility. Definitely a possibility that they were afraid of their precarious position. They're vulnerable. 1,000 pieces of silver is now a pretty big payoff. Now, remember, Avimelech was told that if he doesn't fix this stuff, he's going to be dead. So there's definitely a reason why he wanted to get his stuff together. He's got an imperative, if you will. And by the way, the story we read yesterday was 1,100 pieces of silver for, you know, which is even more, a little bit more, 10% more. But these are big amounts of money. Did anybody notice what Avimelech said to Sarah? Do you notice what was interesting about that line?
I give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Not your
He
husband.
didn't say, I'm giving you your
brother.
husband. Don't you think that's an interesting choice of words?
Yeah,
He could have said, I'm giving your husband,
right.
who I took you from without permit, you know, without authority, if you will, without morality. He still doesn't seem to get it, right? He still doesn't seem to want to wrap his head around the fact that he didn't have a right to do this. And he's still not willing to, he's still not willing to kind of admit what he's done, which is take a man's wife. I mean, he's willing to say I took a man's sister, but not a man's wife. So
He's backing up his own story by continuing to call him brother.
yeah. So it's an interesting indication that maybe Avimelech isn't quite as righteous as he's making himself out to be. And Abraham then prayed to God, and God healed Avimelech and his wife and his slave girls, so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast the womb, every womb of the household of Avimelech, because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. And that is almost like God saying, oh, no, it's not his sister, it's his wife. You know that it's his wife. And what was the punishment that Avimelech, and by the way, how long was she there that they knew that they couldn't have children? That seems to imply it was like longer than 9 months, my friends, because you wouldn't know that people aren't having kids unless the 9 months goes by and you go, hey, did you know, anybody knows there's no kids being born? So that's weird. It's weird that they were there for that long. It wasn't like, it's like the whole time that he's supposed to be there, because, and again, if this is different authors, you can get away with timetables that are slightly different. But God basically told him at the Sodom and Gomorrah moment, this is what's happening. And then like during that time, and while Sodom and Gomorrah were being destroyed and all that stuff, over that year, 9 months of that year were spent with Avimelech in Gerar. That's what it's saying. I'm just telling you, chapter 20 just gave us a timeline of where Avraham is ever since God stopped by at the tent on his way to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, what's of course so powerful about this, the closing fast of every womb. Well, wait a second. That's what Sarah's been dealing with her whole life. For the last 90 years, she can't have children. And we've talked about this before. It says, Kol rechem leveit Avimelech. Rechem is the word for womb in Hebrew, rechem. Racham. The same root as the word for mercy. In Hebrew, we say, Adonai el rachum v'chanu. God is the God of mercy. El malei rachamim, we say at a funeral. El malei, God full of compassion. Malei means full. Rachamim, full of compassion, full of mercy. God full of mercy. We say rachmanis in Yiddish, right? Have some rachmanis. Have some compassion. Have some mercy on somebody. So that's rachmanut. That's the Hebrew word for mercy. So mercy and the womb in Hebrew are the same word. It's considered to be, again, God's mercy when somebody can have a child. It's the reason why that's the same word, mercy.
What was the name? You had the name for women that were barren? They were called
Akara. She's an akara.
No.
Now, the word, they don't use the word akara here, a barren woman. Here, it's just using the words that they were not, that they could have children and that they would be healed by your pa, which is the word rofeh, right? To be healed, like we say, you know, rofeh is rofeh cholim, you know, that God will heal the sick. A rofeh is a doctor in Hebrew, so that they're healed and that they will yeledo, which is to give birth, that they will be able to have children. So they are barren during the time that this is going on, while this charade is happening. Pretty wild. That's chapter 20, the second version of this. Now there's going to be another version of it, but it's going to be a different patriarch that we're going to read the same thing going on. Okay. So that's chapter 20. Now, I will tell you that what's interesting about the way this story lays out before us, everything, and I don't want to dwell on this, I don't want to deal with it a lot. Everything in this story up until here till this line is God. Vayitpalo Avraham el Elohim. Avraham Elohim. Vayirpa Elohim. Elohim is used twice, our God. The last line is Ki atzor atzar Adonai be'ad kol rechem. The last line says, for the Lord had closed the fast every womb of the household of Avimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham.
Wow.
So it's interesting that either another author or somebody added that to the end because they wanted closure or understanding that it was God who did this. If somebody read this line and just said, well, what happened? Why did they not have kids? And then somebody threw in this line that said, because God had made sure they couldn't have kids. What's interesting about this is that it says that Abraham prayed to God and God healed Avimelech and his wife, which means that Avimelech already had a wife. And it also says, and his slave girls, so that they bore children, so that all of those people who he could have kids with now have kids. Okay. But again, the way the story ends is with that very last line, which is, for the Lord had closed fast every womb of the household of Avimelech because of Sarah, the wife of Abraham. So again, it's as if, somebody wanted to have you very clearly say, oh, it's not his sister, it's his wife, and that God had actually done that. Because otherwise God is praying, and it does say healed, that God, that God had, something had happened, or that they couldn't have kids until Abraham said something, but that's critical somehow to the story. And again, even though it's critical, somebody said, well, maybe, it's possible. Somebody said, well, but let's make it very clear what happened, which is that God had punished everybody for what had happened to Sarah, the wife, and not just Sarah, the wife of Abraham. So it's a pretty wild story. And it almost, again, needed that little bit. Somebody said, let's make it real clear what happened. Now, the next line of the Bible is chapter 21. Now, there is as I said, the chapters and verses were put in by Christian scholars. This Samech here tells us that there was actually in the Bible, in the Torah scroll, there's actually a break there. So sometimes the breaks don't really make sense by our standards and by the way we translate them, even by Jewish translations, because we say that's not really a good break. The rabbis, or again, the early scribes, even pre-rabbinic maybe, who put in these breaks said that's a break. But look at the next sentence, which again is a break, but the Lord took note of Sarah as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he spoke.
So we're back to the Lord again. We're away from God.
Yeah, and
Back
it's
to
the
the
Lord there. And the Lord took note of Sarah as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken. And Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had borne to him, the name Isaac. Yay, Isaac. We get Isaac.
Finally.
We've been waiting for the son, and finally he's born. Now, before we move on past the fact that this is miraculous birth, it came in their old age, both of their old age. When God said they're going to have it a year later, God delivered on the promise. He's been promising it. They've been waiting. Then God said it's going to happen, and it happens exactly when God said it would happen. It was clearly a miracle. They were out of the childbearing years. Sarah was definitely out of the childbearing years. It happens a year later, just like God had said. Everything seems to be okay. However, we just read a story that during the last year, Sarah's living with another guy, Avimelech. Now, we never teach the kids this story, because how do you even talk about the Avimelech story? As I told you, we don't talk about the Pharaoh story. We don't talk about the Avimelech story. We can't even get into it. And so here we have, when we normally start the story, that God promised a baby we usually skip the next part, and then we get to the next part, which is that Sarah has a baby and names him Isaac. Now, I will tell you that people who do read the Bible, including the rabbis, including people who've been reading the Torah for thousands of years, have said, hey, wait a second. Let's look at what just happened. God took note of Sarah. He had a baby. She had a baby. They named him Isaac. But look how many times it just told us that this is Abraham's son. Because they say, look, if there's any question, and there could be a question that this is Abraham's son, that this woman did indeed have a son with Abraham. How do we know? Well, she had a baby. Doesn't tell us. Sarah bore a son to Abraham in his old age. Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had born to him, the name Isaac. And the rabbis look at that last verse and they say, that verse seems really redundant. It seems really, really, really redundant. Because if it simply just said Abraham gave his newborn son the name Isaac, is it really born to him? And that's why you have the other phrase that Sarah had born to him. Now, again, without the previous story, you could say, well, it's because it took a really long time for him to be born. And it was a miracle and all that good stuff. But when you read the previous story, maybe it needed a little bit more. No, This is Abraham's son. Now, the rabbis interpret this further. How could you know? How could anybody know? And according to the Midrash steps in and gives us a wonderful answer, a wonderful tidbit, if you will. The baby looked like a genetic identical clone of Abraham. When the kid was born, they said, oh, that's Abraham's kid. Now, I don't know how you know that with a 99-year-old guy, but people who've known Abraham for a good 30 or 40 years said, oh, that's what Abraham used to look like. And when he was a kid, he looked just like that. Now, they didn't have photos back then, but somebody knew. Sarah would have known. She was his sister. That's weird. But Sarah, somebody would have known. Somebody, maybe his brother would have known. Somebody would have said, oh, that's definitely Abraham's kid. So why does Isaac look exactly like Abraham? So there'll never be any question that it's Abimelech's son. We always know who the mom is. We don't always know who the dad is. But in Abraham's case, God stamped it on him, stamped it right on Isaac's face. He looked like his dad. And so that was a good way for paternity to be established. It just isn't just don't take the Bible's word for it. They looked alike. Just exactly for that reason. So everyone would know that this is Abraham's son. By the way, another reason why we have to know this is Abraham's son, and another reason why some people say it's repeated so many times, is because Judaism did something a very, very long time ago that was unusual in stories of heroes and facilitators of greatness for your tribe, for your kingdom, for your people. Generally speaking, most people's heroes, their the original progenitor of their tribe or their people, was oftentimes a demigod, was oftentimes not really human. Oftentimes had a father who wasn't a human being, but was a god. Wonder where we hear those stories. Well, Judaism fought against those stories for a long time. The idea that somebody had to be actually divinely born was something that Judaism we couldn't go down that road. So Abraham, there are midrashim that exist that Abraham and Moses were not exactly human in their creations, if you will. And there was an attempt, especially during some kind of more of the Greco-Roman influence, to kind of tell stories like that about Abraham and Moses, even though they go against the Torah, even though they go against Jewish tradition. but again, it was so common for people to say that their ancestor was actually divine that there were Jews who couldn't hold back from that. And so you see some of that even in Josephus's writings, some of the Greco-Roman writings from the time, from Philo, who was an Alexandrian Jew, a Greek influenced Jew who lived in Egypt, ancient Egypt. You know, they almost start saying those same kinds of things about their ancestors, but we didn't, and the Torah doesn't, and Judaism fought against it during the first century when people were telling these stories about Jesus. And so the impulse to create these narratives about your ancestors, that they're somehow divine, divinely born entities, was something that was always an issue. No matter when the Torah was completed, it was completed hundreds of years before the story of Jesus, which meant that people went backwards on that story, including early followers of Jesus, who maybe were the ones who were the least accepting of it. The version of the Christian Bible narrative of Jesus's birth that's the most pagan, if you will, is from the most pagan author, Luke. And so it is possible that writing for a more Gentile audience, he felt freer to employ some of those Greco-Roman narratives of divinely born rulers. But, it's in the Gospel of Matthew that we have Jesus's ancestry going back to King David and back to, Abraham and Judah and those patriarchs. So again, in the more Jewish story, you don't have the emphasis on a divine birth, but in some of the versions you do. And so this impulse to find miraculous birth exists in an ancient time, but also the impulse to fight it and to not have that happen, you also find from a really early time in the Bible. And again, you can make the argument that you see it here, which is that this child is born to Abraham. It's not born to God. It's not born to Avimelech. It's not born to Pharaoh. It's not born to somebody else. It's Abraham's son. So these first three verses, actually, the repetition of this is actually pretty important, pretty vital. So when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded him. So he did exactly what God had told him to do, which is circumcise your kids at 8 days old. Who's the first person that gets circumcised at 8 days old? Isaac. It's a trivia question. Who's the first bris, traditional Jewish bris? Isaac. Isaac, to some extent, is the first Jewish baby in history. Abraham converted. Abraham became a Jew. Isaac is born a Jew. He's the first Jewish child. And he's circumcised when he's 8 days old. But Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now here we have Sarah said, God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Is it with me or laugh at me? Which is why you have a footnote there. Yitzchak Li could be make fun of me or make fun with me. We don't know. We don't know how she saw it. It can be read either way. This translation definitely wants to go with the more hopeful, pleasant, compassionate, everyone will laugh with me, not will laugh at me. And so, and that's still a joke that we say. They're not laughing with you, they're laughing at you, right? So we still say that. But this seems to maybe be even ambiguous intentionally, because maybe there were people who laughed at her, and maybe there were people who did laugh with her. And the name implies both laughing out of joy and laughing out of ridicule. And by the way, sometimes there's a narrow, razor thin margin between those two things. So Sarah continues. She added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children. Yet I have borne a son in his old age. And the child grew up and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. So Sarah is the one who says, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Yet I have borne a son in his old age. So it's an interesting poem or phrase, song, if you will, little thing that she says, that Sarah is nursing. Sarah nursed, and Abraham was still able to have a child. So both of those things are kind of brought together in this, which before, again, when Sarah laughed at her husband and said at the tent, how's he going to be able to get me pregnant? Now it's, I have nursed children now in my old, I've nursed my child in an old age, that he had a child in his old age. And the child was weaned. Now, we don't know exactly how old Isaac is at this point, but he's at least a couple years old, at least a few years old. We don't want to get into how old he was because we don't know for sure. I will tell you that the thought is that they would wean children in the biblical period at 2 or 3 years old. That's the estimate, but we don't know for sure. We do know that this feast day for his weaning, not his circumcision, that would have been right after. This is a couple years later. That what happens here on this day is critical. This party ends up being a critical moment in the family's life. By the way, we don't have a festival anymore when a child is weaned. That's not a Jewish tradition. We do, however, have a tradition when a child first gets their first haircut, which kind of goes back to this tradition a little bit. It's a little bit like this weaning ceremony. Now, I will tell you, nursing probably was and obviously still is a personal decision, and a personal decision of how long someone nurses would not necessarily be seen as like it had to be at a certain age necessarily. That being said, there's kind of an understanding that for the first few years of a child's life, they are, until they're starting to walk and they start doing these kinds of things, that this is a stage in the child's life where, they're hopefully they're hopefully walking by this point, that they're maybe talking a little bit at this point, that they're at a certain stage, and that they can start to even learn. They can start, repeating and copying behaviors. Now, the Jewish tradition in some Hasidic communities is to have what's called an upshirin. An upshirin is where you cut the child's hair at 3 years old so that they have their first payas. They can grow their payas down and they can actually have something. So they cut their hair. These kids will get their hair cut, and then they can get a little bit of payas. And they usually present the child with their first tzitzit, their first fringes, undershirt. And oftentimes, again, they'll start teaching the child some Torah, some words of Torah, which is
What is
usually
the-
also.
What is the word for weaned?
What's the word for weaned in Hebrew?
Yeah.
The word that we use is gamal or gomel, vaigmal, higamel.
I thought gomel meant large. No?
What? No, that's gadol.
Gadol means large.
Yeah, but it's close. The word implies in Hebrew that this is we use the word gomel when someone survives an accident. We do what's called birkat gomel, which is thank you, God, for giving me a reward that maybe I didn't deserve, which is, if you survive a serious injury or illness, accident, that we say, thank you, God. It's a recognition. It's called benching gomel. So the word gomel here has the same meaning, the same root for why we use it for weaned, is that the child kind of reached a point in their lives where probably are more viable. I mean, I want to say that probably a lot of this had to do with the fact that once a child lived past 3, the odds were that the child was going to actually make it.
Yeah.
Their life expectancy probably was now like on a trajectory where we could say that this child is going to be okay. If this child was getting sick a lot and it wasn't thriving, that, maybe by about 3, they would have known that this is probably it's not going to be a good, I mean, they knew so little about the human body, but, they did probably have some better understandings of things that we don't have, in the sense that maybe they didn't rely on doctors, and they kind of knew a lot of stuff on their own. They kind of had to have a better sense of that. Needless to say, we don't know exactly how old he is. Tradition is usually about 2 or 3. But here's the key. And this is why the scene is even there. Because otherwise, probably aren't going to hear about his weaning ceremony. Honestly, we don't hear about any other weaning ceremonies in the Bible. So that's one of the reasons why we really don't know that much about the tradition and what happened and how long before a child would be weaned, that kind of stuff. We don't have it. We just don't know. But that's why, because of what happens right here. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abraham playing. Metzachek. That's the same root as Yitzchak. She said to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son, for that son of the slave will not have a share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. What happened? What just happened? Now, we knew that Sarah was not happy with Hagar from the moment she got pregnant. There were problems. So this had been developing now for 13 years. This is nothing new. Did they go back to having a good relationship after she came back the last time when she ran away? After Sarah was treating her so bad, and then the angel told her to go back, remember? We don't know. But something happens here. Something happens here. We don't know. We don't know what it is. But it throws Sarah into a complete, get that woman out of here. That kid out of here. They're gone. I don't want this kid around. Now, again, she only has this kid because of her. It was Sarah's idea. It wasn't Abraham's idea. It was Sarah's idea. And now she doesn't call him your son. She says her son, and that son of a slave. Get that son of a slave out of here. Now, doesn't Abraham have an ability right now to say it? Because the matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. The Bible doesn't let us forget that. Abraham doesn't forget that. Abraham doesn't say he was concerned because it was Hagar's son. He says he's upset because it's his son. It says it. It says his son. He recognized the kid as his son. What happened? Sarah finally now says, I've got a son. This is over. This kid's out. He's not getting anything. Get him out of here. Now, without getting into the rest of the story yet, I will tell you that there are midrashim that tell us that there is a reason for Sarah to freak out. This little freak out that she has is based on reality. What's the reality? When it says that Sarah saw Ishmael, it doesn't call him Ishmael here. It's called by the way, notice his name isn't used. He has a name. We know his name. His name is Ishmael. Here he's called the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne him. When it says that he's playing with Isaac, the rabbis interpret that in a couple of different ways. Does anybody want to guess the ways that they interpret this? Anybody want to chime in with a possible playing?
That he's molesting him?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so this is what the rabbis are most concerned with. They're most concerned with the sexual molestation possibility. Is it possible? Absolutely. Did it happen in the ancient world? You bet. We didn't invent this. This didn't happen in the last 20, 30 years. This has been going on since the beginning of humanity. So, so that playing with him is in a sexual way. That's one possibility. That's enough to freak out the mom.
He could even just be bullying him. Do you know?
That's another possibility.
Well,
That he's roughhousing with him, or he's bullying him,
Or
he's
putting his life in danger.
putting his life in danger, hanging him upside down, doing things that brothers do to other brothers. But in this case, Sarah's freaking out because
Danger.
she's thinking, yeah, but she's thinking if something happens to my son, Ishmael gets to inherit all this stuff. So Ishmael has a vested interest to make sure this kid doesn't live.
Right.
This is a danger in our house. He's
Rabbi,
dangerous in our own house. Yeah.
my translation says mocking instead of playing.
Interesting. That's an interesting translation. It's a possibility. Metzachek is to play. Also could be to laugh at. It could be to joke around with. The interesting thing is it doesn't have to be bad. It could be. It doesn't have to be. The word is so amazing because we've seen it now. Sarah used it for herself, for Abraham. Now it's being used to describe what Ishmael is doing with him. This is his name. His name means laughter, to play with, to laugh. These are all possible translations. It could be he was laughing with the boy, playing with the boy. The interesting thing is it's all possibilities. And they're all possibilities that we can imagine. They're all possibilities of
I guess it's deliberately left out so that we consider all possibilities.
Yep. And also this reality that it all depended on the way you looked at it. Because no matter what, Abraham is distressed by it. Because one could say, now, it could be, again, one of the ways we have to look at it, that Abraham is in denial of what really happened. It's possible that he's not in denial, that he's saying, my wife is completely overreacting to what's happening here. My older son is innocently playing with my other son, and they seem to be getting along fine. And yet this woman is overreacting, and I have to deal with this now. So it's possible that, again, it just depended on your vantage point, or different people are naive to what's really going on. You know, one of the things that, again, was to take it another level, one of the things that was the fear maybe in Sarah's mind is when it says that Ishmael is molesting Isaac. She's actually worried, and I'm going to tell you this because this is what the midrash, one of the midrashic traditions is that he's molesting him to the point that he's actually going to make him so that he can't procreate.
Hmm.
That the molestation is actually going to be emasculation, to put it mildly. But he's literally going to render Isaac, impotent and hurt him in such a way that he won't be able to have children on his own. It'll be the end of Isaac's line, which is the end of Sarah's line. So you can imagine a woman who's now waited to be 90 years old to have a child, that she's very overprotective of this child. The whole narrative is amazing because it gives us this vision of a mother who's very overprotective of her child, right? Who's literally living in fear that something's going to happen to her son, her only son, the son that she's waited 90 years for. Now, Abraham already has a son, Ishmael, and maybe he just doesn't care that much if he has one son or if he had two. I mean, I'm sure he cares. He doesn't, not like he doesn't like Isaac, though. We're going to see. It's going to definitely be put to the test.
Right.
But what we have here is the possibility that it really does depend on your vantage point of what's happening here. And is Sarah in this feeling of nothing better happened to my child? Because first of all, she's 90 years old. She doesn't know how many more years she has. Between you and me, she's got 37. So she's going to actually be able to see this kid grow up to be 37. But she doesn't know that. She thinks that I could die any moment, and my son will have nobody to protect him. That's one possibility. She's also 90 years old, and she finally has a son. She is really overprotective of him, to the point that, again, there's a level of delusion there, that she's not even able to see that the kid is just, he's playing with his older brother. There's nothing bad there. There's nothing bad that's going to happen there. We don't know. Abraham.
But there's risk. There is risk.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, we assume always that when it says that this matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his, we always assume that he's now going on to the side of Ishmael, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense that he would object. So we usually assume that he's defending him. I mean, it makes sense based on the context.
Mhm.
We'll tell you, one of the things that's interesting about this story is we read it now, and as we've been reading it for the last 70 years or so, one of the interesting things that I've talked to with people who have lived this life, and I'm looking now on our line right now, we don't have anybody who's on right now who can verify this for me, but Francine, who was here for a bit, has been on before. For people who have, and I'm going to say this because Francine's father, Max, was born in Austria in the 1920s. For people who have parents who were Holocaust survivors, those parents were beyond overprotective. I mean, they were, in some cases, it was a real problem for their kids, because the parenting was so neurotic, based on the trauma that they had suffered. These parents were so protective of their children. Their children ended up having some issues of their own because of the neuroses of the parents, and the fear that these parents had all the time, that their kids were either going to be taken away, that they were the last surviving remnants of their family, and that fear from the Holocaust was so pervasive that it affected at least one generation, and even to some extent goes into another generation. Or in some cases, that next generation reacted in a contrary way, and went not protective enough of their kids, or because they were so overprotected that they kind of went back and hit back the pendulum the other way, and let their kids get away with stuff because they didn't want to live like that. They didn't want to have they don't want to have that trauma of what their parents did. So in actuality, it caused the pendulum to swing further back the other direction. And then and the scars and the effect of the Holocaust continues to decimate people, because they still don't know how to deal with, a balance of parenting. They don't know how to be parents that have kind of nobody's perfect. Nobody is going to get parenting down, but that there is some kind of middle ground between protecting your children and overprotecting and smothering your child. And
I can tell you that Joe's parents were Holocaust survivors, and they were very overprotective.
yeah, I thought so. I'm not gonna speak about it from, you have a better vantage point from that than I do, but I do know that his parents were survivors, and it had an effect on him.
And food was very important. They always had they would hoard food.
Yeah.
They did a lot of stuff, and not were distrustful of neighbors and letting people into their house. And there was a lot of things that's even passed down to the third generation.
Yeah. And so again, some of those things are repeated.
Mhm.
Some of those things, the reaction is to go completely the opposite direction.
Right.
And to into an unhealthy level, then let your kids get away with anything because they don't want to smother their kids, and they just react. They just so blatantly, like, not overprotective, that they don't even know what's going on, and they want to correct it, and they correct it by overcorrecting.
Mhm.
And it's just a natural thing. I mean, it doesn't have to be the Holocaust. There's other people who suffered traumas that overcorrect when they're dealing with their chance to parent or to do anything, when we ever have a chance to do something, but usually it's something that we've seen modeled somewhere before. So it's really hard to not see this story of Sarah's reactions and not see trauma and the fact that, how can you expect a woman in her 90s, who, by the way, I just want to also point out, just spent the last 9 months, according to the Torah, living as a captive, whatever, wife of a king, because they're worried that she's going to get captured anyways, and that Abraham's going to be killed. So, these things going on in the background are part of the Torah, and they're part of our history, and when you read the stories again, what do we take away from them? I mean, one of the things you take away is that when parents have these fears, sometimes they're based on reality, sometimes they're not, and in the end, it really doesn't matter, because the kids are the ones who have to deal with it. And the irony is that, and we've talked about this before, but this is the time to talk about it. Isaac's name means laughter. The guy never has a chance to laugh, according to what we have in the Bible. Maybe he got to laugh at other points, maybe he did, but he doesn't seem to laugh a lot. As we're going to read in the chapter in 2 weeks, that's the binding of Isaac. It's the exact opposite of laughter. So this is a guy who ironically doesn't ever seem to have a chance to laugh. So he might have, we don't have it in the Torah. Everything about his life is not funny. Honestly, I mean, there's nothing in Isaac's life where we go back and go, oh, that's really, I mean, there's one scene where he gets to meet Rebecca, which is not laughing, but is beautiful and is loving and is nice, which we read in a couple chapters, just a few chapters from now, but not what happens at this point, and what happens when his own sons, fight over him, and it's not an easy life. And so here we go back to Abraham's reaction. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. So here, at least, it says, God says, do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Now, here's the problem. If you read it in English, it seems to be Isaac, the boy, and then your slave, which is the slave boy, Ishmael. That's not what it says. It says the Na'ar, which almost by definition is a teenager. It's not a child. It's not a baby. Can a 3-year-old be a Na'ar? Yes, technically, but not likely. Not that they would have used the word baby necessarily for a 3-year-old, But the next word, amatecha, is not a slave. It's a female slave. So we know that this is the boy Ishmael and
Right.
his mother Hagar. So don't anybody think that the translation is not good there, because if it had said, or your female slave, you would have known that that's clearly Ishmael, the boy that they're talking about. God does not call Ishmael a slave. Okay. I just want you to know, nobody except for Sarah called him a slave. Amatecha is Hagar. I will point out, by the way, just so you know, when Sarah says to Abraham, get rid of that woman, that slave woman, she doesn't say Hagar. The Bible called her Hagar. She doesn't call her Hagar. She calls, get that slave woman out. Now, what's interesting about that is that God repeats that. God doesn't say Hagar, says the slave woman. Just you're clear, we know it's Hagar. But what's interesting about it is that Sarah doesn't name her, won't call her name, because calling her by a name doesn't reduce her to the slave and to the fact that she wants this person out of her house. And if she's Hagar, she's a person with an identity, with a unique identity, individuality, and a personhood, which she's now saying she's a slave. Get her out. So she said it. And God says it's okay, because that's where your lineage will be through. But God says, as for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed. So again, God tells Abraham, it's gonna be okay. Let him go. He will also be a great nation. I won't forget about it. So here's what the Bible says. Vayaskem Avraham baboker. Early the next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water. Early the next morning. What's critical about this is that we see this same phrase, early the next morning. It doesn't say the next day. It doesn't say, and later Abraham took. It says early the next morning. And the rabbis point out that this is what makes Abraham special, is that he doesn't procrastinate like most of us. When most of us are faced with a difficult decision, we're going to put it off as long as we can. I don't want to make that call, right? I don't want to call. I don't want to do that. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be tough. I don't want to do this. I don't want to ask this person for something. Abraham is the exact opposite. Abraham gets up early the next morning, that he's going to do the hard things, and he's going to get to them. And the Bible doesn't use these words without teaching us a lesson, right? Even this one word, which in Hebrew is two words, early the next morning, vayaskem. It's three words. He got up early. He arose early. It's not just he woke up, got up early. It's interesting, by the way, that there's a Hebrew word for that, but we're going to see the same word repeated when God tells him to sacrifice Isaac. Vayaskem Avraham in the next chapter. I'm telling you that because you can't look at those words in the Bible without seeing the power and the context of those two chapters back to back, and the fact that Abraham also has done this now. He's gotten up early with his son to send him away. Now, in this moment where he's sending away his own son, Abraham is essentially taking a 13-year-old child and saying, you're now on your own. Must not have been an easy moment for Abraham. And let's wonder if there's a connection to what we're going to see next week, or not next week, the next story we read, which is the binding of Isaac. So he took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child, and he sent her away. and she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. So
He
There's a-
could be older, couldn't he? Because Isaac was weaned and then,
okay, yeah, so you're right. So he's 16, 15,
Yeah.
16.
so that's
So he's-
not, you know,
So he was 13 when Isaac was born. So he's a 15, 16-year-old. It's
Yeah.
still not what you want to
Not
do to
cool.
a 16-year-old kid. Say you're off on your own with your mom. We're kicking you out of the house. This is not what you do to your kid. And what it says is that Abraham placed them over her shoulder himself. It's not like he gave it to one of his servants and said, here, you take her out. And I don't want to, I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to see it. I'm not going to be a part of this. Which, quite frankly, I don't know that I would have done this. I don't know that I could have done what Abraham did at this moment, which is place the water over her shoulder. So they're gone. They're out of the house. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes, which, by the way, I just want to point out, if he's 16 years old, as again, Gail pointed out, based on the numbers, that should be about what he is. At least there's a possibility that this version of the story this author doesn't have him at 16. He doesn't seem to be a 16-year-old kid at this point. Just want to point that out. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away, for she thought, let me look on when the child dies. And sitting thus far, she burst into tears. So they run out of water. I mean, at this point, they're gonna die. And what's interesting, of course, is that she doesn't want to see her son when he dies. Now, I will tell you that there are some interpretations of this story that do not sit well, that Hagar does not behave like a mother should behave at this moment.
Right.
Will tell you that that is a possibility. The takeaway that at least some people have from the story is there's something wrong with Hagar. Don't you want to spend your child's last minute on earth with the child? Why is your feeling of not wanting to see this greater than your wanting to comfort your child as a child's dying?
It is weird.
So there is a level of discomfort, let's put it that way, with Hagar's behavior. So, I mean, it's not that she's not compassionate about it. She's crying. So it's not like she just doesn't want to see it. She's crying. And it says, God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Now, if you want to know why we say that Hagar might have been a little incorrect in her reaction right now, is for this reason. If you read carefully, it says, God heard the cry of the boy. An angel of God called to Hagar, right? God heard the cry of the boy, not the cry of Hagar, but the cry of the boy, which seems to imply that God didn't really take as much notice of Hagar's feelings, but really the problem that the boy was in. That God didn't react to Hagar, God reacted to the boy, to Ishmael. And I mean, it's not that God isn't sensitive to that, Because God says, what trouble? The angel says, what troubles you, Hagar? Right? God has heeded the cry of the boy. So it's the angel who notices. You can make the argument the angel notices Hagar's cry. God's noticed the boy's cry. Come, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Which again, I don't want to belabor this because the whole scene is a troubling scene. I'm not saying that Sarah is off the hook for this. I don't want to say Hagar's messed up or whatever, but I will tell you this. There is a sense here that what troubles Hagar is not that her child is dying. You know where I'm going to go with this, right? Not that he's dying. It's that her child is not going to be a great nation. That she's really concerned not with his well-being necessarily, but what she's going to inherit being his mom. Her lineage is what she's really concerned about, not the boy. Which is why what the angel says is not about your child dying, but that he will be a great nation as well. Because the angel could have said, don't worry. Don't worry. God will get water for the kid and food. Kid will survive. That's not what the angel says. The angel says, I'll make a great nation of him too. Right? So don't worry about that. It'll be covered. He's okay. He'll be a great nation too. Not that he'll survive. So that's an interesting interpretation, if you will, based on what it says what the angel says. What is the concern that Hagar has?
You know what? I would just read that your son is going to live and he's going to, become a nation.
But it could, of course, but it could have said that. It could have said, your son will live, because all you care about at the moment that you're in the desert and you're out of water is not whether my son is going to be a great nation, but is he going to live to see tomorrow? So it doesn't seem to address the bigger issue. Now you could say, well, it skips over the bigger issue, but the bigger issue is, don't worry, I'm going to get you water. Everything's going to be okay. But what she was troubled about was that. What is essentially happening here is God is, and through the angel, is telling them that things are going to be okay. They're going to be okay for the way you think about things, the way you're approaching things, which again, it's not saying, I'm not getting Sarah off the hook for her reaction, because Sarah didn't have to do this. At least according to the Bible, or at least the Midrash or whatever, nobody's saying that Sarah necessarily had to do it, unless you follow the tradition that Ishmael was raping the boy, right? His brother Isaac. That's a possibility. And that's the possibility, then get that kid out of the house. On the other hand, why would you make a great nation out of a child molester? I will say this. The Bible also threw in some words that we also have to address, which is, fear not, for God has heard the cry of the boy. Could have been just heard the cry of the boy. Ba'asher Husham, where he is. God, now you could say, well, because he's over there and you're not there. He's over there and you're here, Hagar. You're not in his midst anymore. So if you want to get water, go where he is. That's the simple understanding, right? That's the basic understanding. If you want water, it's going to be underneath the boy, because that's where the boy, God's heard of the cry of the boy where he is, not where you are, right? You're in a different place. That boy needs to survive right now. And God has heard the cry of the boy where he is. Now go over to him, because that's what the angel says. Lift up the boy and hold him by the hand. So get back over to your child. That's what the angel says to her.
Mm-hmm.
Get back to your boy. So that's one possibility. Go over to where he is, because that's where the water is, not where you are, not where you're worried about your inheritance And who's going to take care of you, Hagar? Because your son is now dead and you don't have somebody, you don't have a legacy, right? You're not going to get, to use the modern analogy, right? Your son has been thrown out, you and your son have been thrown out of the house. You're worried about whether your child's going to go to college and get a good job and become a millionaire like his father. His father was rich. If he doesn't have the trappings of Abraham and that lifestyle, who's going to take care of me? That's the modern equivalent. Everyone can associate that, right? I mean, we can't all associate with a polygamous household where there's two different wives with different sons, but we can think of modern day serial monogamy.
Divorce.
Exactly. Where one lady got thrown out of the house.
Right.
And she's sitting there and going, I have no leverage, because this was before we had palimony and celebrity lawyers, that the celebrity divorce lawyers that can get you your fair share. This woman's saying, I get nothing now. Who's going to take care of me in my old age? Because my son's got nothing. We're out in the desert. It's over. The whole thing's over. I had a child who was a child of Abraham. I had everything coming to me. And now I'm out. Now I've got nothing. Sarah threw me out of the house. I get nothing. So the angel says, get back to the boy. Okay, get back to the boy where he is that's that. And then the angel says, and again, Hagar, don't worry about that. That'll come. It's going to be there. It's going to be a great nation. People will remember you, Hagar. You're going to be cared for. It's going to be great. Great things will happen to him. He'll go to college. He'll get a great job. He'll be successful like his father. Okay. Everything's going to be okay with that too. But get to your son now, because he's going to die. And if he's dead, that's the issue right now. Get him.
Right.
And there's another possibility where he is, which is that the boy, Ishmael, who's now even making the argument, a young man, Hagar, whatever way they're going to live their lives, it's not the life that Abraham and his family are going to live. And still God says to Hagar, and by implication to the son too, to Ishmael, God is with the boy where he is. He's not where Isaac is. He's not going to have the same kind of life. He's not going to be the ancestor of the Israelites. I get it. I get it, Hagar. It's not the life you wanted, but it's an okay life. And the boy will be cared for where he is. He is going to be okay for him. And where he is, Ba'asher Husham, is with what he has. And what's interesting about that is that there is a hope in that. And I think maybe we have a better appreciation of it today, that we have different children. And again, taking off the layers of different wives and polygamy and whatever else, there's an interesting teaching here, which is that your child, where that child is, where he or she is, that God can hear the cry of that boy where that child is at that place. It doesn't have to be, when the kid graduates from Duke or whatever, that where the child is, where he is in the wilderness. And of course, the wilderness is by extension not a place where you want to be. It's not safe. It's not the life of domestic upper middle class comfort, but the boy will be cared for where he is, wherever he is, even if he's out in the wilderness, she's out in the wilderness, God will care for them there.
Do you know if what this passage is like in the Quran? I know that they see that Ishmael is Abraham's oldest son.
Oh, there's a version of it in the Quran. So they even though they like to say that Ishmael was the one who was almost sacrificed, there is a version of this story in the Quran. And actually, it's one of the places we're about to see is actually, well, I'll get to it in a second, is actually still a holy site in Islam where this takes place. Okay, so it's actually a very important story in Quran and Islamic history, but not from the standpoint of what I just told you, not my more modern midrash, which I didn't invent. I'm sure I've heard it somewhere, which is that when we talk about a boy being where he is at that moment, or a child being where he is, that means that God can help us find our children where they are
Where
at that
they are.
moment, where they are at that moment in their life. And it may not be the best place physically, spiritually, literally where they're at, where they live. Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. I mean, that literally could be written on the walls of, a place like Beit Teshuvah or anywhere else
Right.
where we don't want to see our children, and say, hey, look, God hasn't forgotten them where they're at. And at that moment, they're in the wilderness. Right now, at this moment, they're on the verge of death. They're out of water. They're going to die. And it says that God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. And she went and she filled the skin with water and let the boy drink. As you notice, this is the legend of a well that was going to be used by originally by Hagar and Ishmael to have water. And she sees this well and fills the skin with water. And God was with the boy, and he grew up in the wilderness, became a bowman. And he lived in the wilderness of Paran. And his mother got away from him from the land of Egypt, her home country. And we're gonna break right there, because that's the end of that part of the story. And so there's a little ending right there. The next time we're going to come back up to Avimelech and Avraham, but this is a good place to end this part of the story. I will tell you that, again, this is all from the portion Vayera. This is a portion that we traditionally read at Rosh Hashanah. We read the second part of the story, which deals with the binding of Isaac. Most Reformed congregations read that story. But this story and the story of the binding of Isaac were traditionally read at Rosh Hashanah. This is the Islamic tradition of what happens at this place, at this well. It's called the Well of Zamzam. And it is near Mecca. Now you wonder, how could this possibly be happening near Mecca? But if you are following the Islamic tradition states that the Zamzam well was revealed to Hajar, which is Hagar in the Quran, the second wife of Ibrahim, and his wife, and the mother of Ismail. But by the instruction of God, Ibrahim left his wife and son at a spot in the desert and walked away. She was desperately seeking water for her infant son, but she could not find any, as Mecca is located in a hot, dry valley and few sources of water. Hajar ran 7 times back and forth in the scorching heat between the 2 hills of Safa and Marwa. And they were, again, notice the difference. She's looking for water, folks. That's not what the Bible says was happening.
Right.
She kind of left it alone, according to the Bible story. Can't have that about Hajar. Getting thirstier by the second, the infant Ishmael scraped the land with his feet, and suddenly water sprang out. There are other versions.
He went back to being an infant.
There are other stories of this. There are other versions of the story involving God sending his angel Gabriel or Jibrail, who kicked the ground with his heel or wing, and the water arose. According to Islamic tradition, Ibrahim built the Bat Ula near the site of the well, a building which had been originally constructed by Adam, and today is called the Kaaba, a building towards which Muslims around the world face in prayer 5 times each day. The Zamzam well is located approximately 20 miles east of the Kaaba. In another Islamic tradition, Muhammad's heart was extracted from his body, washed with the water of Zamzam, and then was restored in its original position, after which it was filled with faith and wisdom. So needless to say, the well of Zamzam is very critical for Islam, my friends. There is no question that this well is maybe again one of the most important spots in all of Islam, that it actually is connected to where Mecca was located. And again, if you will, we know that Mecca, according to history, was a pilgrimage site for people who were Arab pagans who wanted to go to the site where there were idols and things like that. Muhammad got all the idols out of the Kaaba, out of the shrine, and repurposed it. But what was important was it was a pre-existing pilgrimage site. Connecting it to the story of Ishmael and Ibrahim is very important for Islam. So thank you, as I was gonna share this part, Gail, but thank you for asking the question, and again, reminding us of how important this really is for the over 1 billion Muslims in the world, that this well of Zamzam becomes to some extent connected to the Kaaba. So the shrine of Mecca is connected by this legend to Zamzam or Zamzam. It is the reason that to some extent the Kaaba has an Islamic tradition, because otherwise what's its connection to Abraham? Now there are other legends and stories about Mecca being a place that Abraham also was important to Abraham. But today, as you can see, and for over 1,000 years, pilgrims would go to Zamzam, and they would get water from it. And that this is considered to be one of the pilgrimage sites that people go to when they go and make pilgrimage, when they do the hijrah to actually make a hajj, to do what Muhammad did in the hijrah. They actually go to this well. This is one of the stops on a jihad. So on a hajj, sorry, jihad. So I will tell you that this is important because there are people around the world who will make a pilgrimage to this very well in Mecca. It is, as you can see, not anywhere near Israel. So here's where the Zamzam well is. This is where Israel is. It's many hundreds of miles away. But this is.
Okay, the other question I have is, then how do they explain the British circumcision? Did not Abraham circumcise Ishmael?
Yeah, but that's why some Muslims don't circumcise at 8 days old, because Ishmael wasn't circumcised at 8 days old.
Well, you're saying he's an infant, though. He's cast out with his mother as an infant.
Okay.
Or at 13.
So it's problematic, but it's problematic even within the Bible of how old Ishmael is when he's sent away. Is he 15, 16, or is he 5 or 6? Is he just a little bit older than Isaac, or is he much older than Isaac? It's a little hard to tell. Mm-hmm. The Bible in one place clearly says that Isaac is born when Ishmael is 13 years old. So in one place, Abraham is 86 when Ishmael is born, and he's 99 when Isaac's born. In that author, or in that version, or that is clear. It is also not clear in one author. It seems like he's a little child. It also seems in the Quran that they want him to be a little child. Look, if he's a 16-year-old teenager, then being out in the wilderness is not quite as dangerous for him. You can make the argument that he should be protecting his mother at 16 and not the other way around. So all of those things go into the discussion about what's going on with the Ishmael.
We don't really know a lot about ages, like with Isaac. When he's, the next what we're going to read in 2 weeks. We don't know how old he was.
We don't know how old he is. And we only come up with the possibilities of what he is because of, we know that in the next chapter, his mother dies and she's 127 when she dies. Based on those ages, then he has to be somewhere between 3 and 37 in order, sometime between when he was weaned and we know he's old enough to ask his father a question, that he seems to be in that range. But is he a child? Is he a teenager? Is he even maybe up to 37 years old? He could be up to 37 during the binding story, which again changes your perspective. Let's hold off on that until we read it, not next week, but the week after. So we will be reading that story, and that's the next story read, the chapter 22. We're going to read a couple verses of chapter 21, and then we're going to be in chapter 22. And I will tell you that we're going to be able to look at that story in greater depth. The chapter 22 story, we always are rushing through it at the holidays. We're rushing through it even when it's part of Vayera, because all of this is all part of Vayera in a normal, in a normal year when we're reading by the Torah portion. So again, all of these stories build up on each other. They all deserve our attention. And again, that's why we're doing it the way we're doing it. So thank you everybody for joining us. Joyce,
Don't break a leg.
it's great to see you.
And no broken legs.
Yeah,
Rabbi.
No, don't break a leg, Rabbi.
Exactly. Everybody will tell you, yes, when you get to a certain age, something like skiing becomes,
Bunny Hills,
becomes risky. But yes, it's going to be nice to be at the Rocky Mountains. Again, it's more importantly, it's great to see Joyce. It's so wonderful that you've
Thank you.
And so nice that you're upright.
And thank you, Mike. Figured me out. I appreciate it.
for getting her
Spent
up.
35 years working on computers. I was hoping I could fix you.
Yes.
Well, you finally fixed me. I needed it. I
Now
needed
you can fix me.
Thank you. And by the way, but again, please everybody stay healthy and clean and safe. And I'm going to actually visit one of our congregants is battling right now COVID. Please put your prayers out to Marianne Himlin, who's a good friend of Joyce's, and she's in the
Yes.
hospital in Antelope Valley, and she's been intubated and
Oh my.
we're really hoping and praying that she'll make a recovery, but it's very critical right now. And she's a wonderful lady and a newer member of our temple. She lives out in Antelope Valley, and she's part of our growing Antelope Valley contingent. But again, Joyce had been working on her for years to get her to come over, and she finally decided to make the switch over to our synagogue. And she was at our Sukkot party and would have been at our Hanukkah vodka and latke, but she got sick right about that time. So this has been going on for a couple of weeks. And, have your prayers up for her and for everybody who's dealing with illness right now. Everybody stay healthy and strong, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon, everybody. Take care.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Rabbi.
Thank you. All
Thank
right.
you.
See
Bless
you
you.
next year.
Love you. We'll see you next year. Correct.
Bless you.
Bye-bye.